You are listening to Fantha Tracks.
You're listening to Fantha Tracks. Flip through the galaxy of literature. Welcome to Canon Fodder.
Pete, welcome to Canon Fodder. We are here to talk about Who Owns the Myth, your new book, which has just come out this month. There's a lot to dig into, but first things first, what instigated this? What made you even want to sit down and tackle such actually a fuller subject than you might think initially?
You know, it's actually one of those things where I've always thought there was some sort of a book in me based on my Star Wars experience. And I wanted to write fiction for a while, but it turns out I'm not a great fiction writer. So, having had the Around the Galaxy podcast since 2019, I started thinking, well, maybe there's something related to that. What have I learned through the podcast? And my first initial stab at a book was literally taking some of the great stories I heard from people like yourself and authors and actors and fans that I've spoken to and sort of tell the stories I heard there. But it became very clear to me very early on that those aren't my stories to tell, right? I'm really excited that people came on and shared them with me, but that's not my story to tell. So I realized that I had a story to tell, but not enough for a full book. And I also have realized, having been a fan since 1977, since seeing it on the big screen without it being called A New Hope, and being a fan for the last 5 decades with opportunities, working with Lucasfilm on fan publications, having my podcast, going to events, meeting great people like you through fandom. There was a story there, but I couldn't figure out what it was. But suddenly I was hit by 2 thoughts. Number one was, why are we so passionate about it, right? Because I didn't want to go into the toxicity of fandom. That's a book that nobody should write or read. But I did want to certainly discuss where some of those deep discussions come from. Like, why do we argue about Star Wars if we love it? Like, if you don't like the prequels and I do, that's not an argument, but sometimes it is. So I wanted to get an understanding of why we are so passionate about Star Wars. And the second thing that I wanted to do is sort of a question that came to me was, what happens when the creator of a myth, George Lucas in this case, writes the myth, puts it out into the world with the original trilogy? We all as a community take ownership of it because we love it so much. And then he comes back. So what happens when the writer comes back? And, as we saw during some of the prequel blowout, not everybody, it wasn't what they all wanted. And the response was interesting, because to think of Star Wars not being a joyous experience seemed unthinkable. And so all those pieces combined sort of created what I found to be a very sort of interesting look at mythology, which is sort of the root of why we love it, and kind of a thumbnail look at fandom and kind of a love letter to the fandom, and sharing my experience as well.
The hook you found is a fascinating hook, because the book lays out sort of the history of Star Wars and gives us a bit of a general history lesson of what happens and when, which is always useful and handy. But also your journey as well, running parallel with that. But as you say, as a fandom, the thought that you can have the original trilogy and Star Wars can come out and be such a massive thing. And as you say in the book, by the end of the 80s, it's an institution, and it's barely 10 years old, but it's rock solid in the zeitgeist. It's rock solid in culture. Pretty much by that point, as much as Star Trek is, which is sort of a decade older. And yet you step forward to, already the special editions is kind of when you come in with, Galaxy Mag and the stuff that you did. And then I'll use the word schism. It's probably not quite the right word, but, the mini little fracture that happens. And then the prequels, where so many people, and we were both sort of in fan sites at a similar time, me in the UK, you in the States, and you saw that big change in cultural change in the online fandom from when Phantom comes out, and there's hundreds of sites by the time Clones comes out, and there's lots of sites, but not so many sites. So why do you think it was the case that the maker, the guy that comes up with all of this, who then goes back to his original notes that he wrote down all those years ago to fill in the story we were promised from the novelization in 76, you know, and we get it. And yet a huge portion of the fandom either didn't get it, and I admit I didn't get it the first time. It took a few views for me to get Phantom, but didn't get it, or just flat out denied it.
Yeah, well, I think that that's kind of the core of Star Wars fandom as a whole. One of the things that I sort of observed is one of the things that I've learned is that Star Wars is so very personal. And during that sort of quote unquote dark times, as we call it in the fandom, right, when there was no movies, and the only thing there were the extended universe novels. But at the same time, we were kind of taking ownership of that story because it was part of who we are. And I think that it feels sort of overstated, but I don't really think it is. You know, Star Wars is part of my personality. It's part of your personality. People know you, I'm sure, among your friend groups as, oh, Mark's the Star Wars guy. Yeah. And that's who you are. And so when the prequels came out, or even the starting at the special editions, something as simple as Greedo shooting first changed what we fundamentally believed, or some people fundamentally believed about this story that we felt ownership of. And so I think then when the prequels came out, I always liken it to, I'm a big fan of The Last Jedi, and as either divisive as that is or not, I think it's a great story. However, when I first saw it, I walked out thinking, that wasn't what I wanted at all, because in my head, I had written the second story in that sequel trilogy. I knew what was going to happen, and I was wrong. And I think the same thing happened for the prequels. We, because it's part of who we are as people, if it doesn't look like, if we don't relive that moment from when we were 7 or 10 or 15 years old, it becomes a failure. And that's not a fair barometer for the success or whether or not you like a movie, but it's a natural barometer, right? We want to go back to that moment where we feel awe. And let's face it, you know, when it came out for me in 99, I was 29 years old. There was nothing is going to make me feel like I did when I was 7 years old ever again. And so how I responded to that was not unexpected, but you know, a challenge to kind of deal with as a person, right? So it's like when you find out, you know, if you find out that somebody you've loved your whole life is not exactly what they're still who they are, but there's something about them that you didn't quite expect. It kind of, it's a little challenging to deal with, perhaps.
Fantatrax. Hoodoo!
That's such a well-rounded way of putting it, because I was the same with Phantom. When I first saw it, it didn't click with me at all, and we watched it. I was in Vegas. We went to Vegas to see it, and we saw it about 6 times on that trip. And it didn't come out in the UK till the July. So by the time we came back, you know, we'd changed the website up, and we were all ready for it to go, and so on and so forth. But yeah, I think I always think on this topic, you know, that to remember that this was, especially guys, we're a similar age, so guys our age were, you know, 6 or 7 when that thing came out, and that's who George was kind of making it for. Yeah. So if you're nearly 30 when Phantom comes out, like we were, what a bonus to still enjoy it. So, you know, to take that forward with you is so important. You don't want to talk about toxicity in Star Wars. You don't want to talk about the division in Star Wars. But sadly, in the realms of the fandom, it is almost unavoidable. I wonder why that developed to the level that it did, because it was always back in the day, the 80s, the Starlog and Starburst era. It was Star Wars versus Star Trek. That was an easy one to throw out there, and people outside the fandoms would see that as an obvious thing to dig at. And yet, when you were actually a savvy fan within either fandom, well, I'm in both, you knew that ILM were working on both, and there's certain actors overlapped in both, and there was a lot of sort of connective tissue between the two that maybe wasn't realised. And then you see Lucas and Roddenberry shaking hands at the Starlog convention, and there's no amnesty, no amnesty there. Yeah, everything's good. Yep. And then Star Wars does the weirdly cannibalistic thing that we've done for the last nearly 30 years and turned on itself. I just wonder, as you say, we love Star Wars so much, and there's a personal ownership. And you made the great example of Han and Greedo as, I know this scene. I can quote that scene in a pub, you know, and then all of a sudden you can't because it's slightly changed. I wonder why it is that we got, I'm saying we as the collective fandom, good or bad, I wonder why we got so hung up on these differences.
I think it's almost like, and I was very hesitant and careful when I wrote the book to not compare it to religion, because I think that's, you know, if you look at if you really dig it down, in a way, because I don't want to overstate it, but it's fandom, but in a way it is like a religious connection in that myths are that way, right? If it becomes who you are, it's what you're raised with. It's let's face it, Star Wars influenced our belief system one way or another, right? And so when a Catholic and a Protestant meet, there's things they disagree on, and there were wars fought over it, right? And so it's a little bit like that. And I think it's the other thing is that the internet has not made that any better. Whereas, I was just saying on my show recently, like I'd always hoped when the internet exploded, people would use it to understand the other side better, whatever that other side might be, politics, sport, whatever. But what it does is it collects what you want to hear and reinforces it. And so I think the reason there is that toxicity is, of course, there's the whole fact that people make money on it. It's very easy. It's a lot easier to make money by creating issues that may or may not be there. But the second piece to it is you don't have to do it face to face, right? When Phantom Menace came out, and I would have discussions with people who liked it versus me who was having an issue with it, I was able to get kind of like very passionate about what I did and didn't like. However, it was a face-to-face thing, and we agreed to disagree. And online, there is no such thing as agree to disagree. It's just walk away in anger, and that's it. Right?
Yeah.
So,
or someone has to have the last word, or
right. Nope. I'm just going to reply one more time. So I think the internet has amplified that sort of aggressiveness in the conversation that was never really there.
So the title of the book, "Who Owns the Myth?" Mm-hmm. I'm going to ask you straight up. Who do you believe owns the myth, or does nobody own the myth? I mean, because it's George's concept, but it's not just George, it's Kurt's and it's all the other guys that helped on that trilogy. Yep. And then George expands it with the help of other people. And even he's influenced to a degree by the EU and Legends, as we call it now, because it's just out there in the world and it's passing his desk, and he was a comics guy, so he sees all these different things. And so this thing takes on almost a life of its own. But now that if we want to homogenize the Star Wars experience as a myth, and it's certainly, as you say in the book, a modern myth, who owns it? I mean, we own it. Lucasfilm owns it. George would rent it to us $10 at a time, as he used to say. But, who do you say owns the myth?
I think at the point where Star Wars is today, I think it's more of a philosophical question, and I think it is based on, I think it's anybody who has ever enjoyed it, taken it home with them in their head and their hearts, and it has influenced them in one way or another. And I think that's, I think we see phrases like real fan and that sort of thing. I've seen it in music conversations. I've seen it everywhere. But anybody who has been impacted enough to enjoy it and take something from it owns the myth. And yes, of course, George Lucas created it. Disney owns it right now. Hundreds of books and comic books and video games and things have expanded it. But the ownership of the myth, I don't think that I own it any more than you own it, than my son owns it, who's now a fan, who's come in through a different angle, to an older fan who's been a fan for years but never got into the sequels and the prequels, but it impacted them. So it's kind of a cop-out answer, but I think the reality is it's anybody who's ever been affected by it. And it's interesting to see the levels at which it's affected, people are affected by it, because, again, you and I, we have podcasts, we have fanzines, we do all these things. So we're like a kind of a different level of fandom. And I don't mean that, it doesn't mean we're better or worse. Sure, it just means we take it a little more seriously. But, the guy on the street who just loves when he sees Star Wars on TBS on the weekend or something, that's his, right? Because everybody knows who Darth Vader is. Everybody knows who Yoda is. And now everybody knows who Grogu is, right? So It's in there. It's part of the culture.
For everything in one location, daily news, reviews, interviews, podcasts, video, and social media feeds, bookmark fanthatracks.com for Star Wars news 24/7, 365.
Can you give our listeners a little sense of your own fandom journey? Because you're in the States, so you saw Star Wars in 77, but then pretty quickly, over time, you get into the online experience with your early websites, and then that infamous call from Sansweet. Can you just give us a little bit of a timeline on how that all played out?
Yeah. So the first time I saw Star Wars was 1977. I saw it not as late as the UK, but I saw it later in the summer because my dad actually played bass guitar in a band. So the weekends were tough to get. And so we finally had a weekend in September where he was able to take me to go see it. Because again, this was also the days before multiplexes, before movies were everywhere. In many cases, it was a half hour to an hour drive to go see it in the right place. So I saw it then, but I remember getting a t-shirt from my grandmother for my birthday, which was in July. And I had a picture of C-3PO on it and the word Star Wars. And I didn't know who he was. And so I assumed he was the villain. It was kind of funny. I don't know what made me think the lovely Anthony Daniels would ever be a bad guy, but that's where my head went. So I was a fan, and it became the basis of my friendships as kids. In fact, I should have put this story in the book, but one of my favorite memories is when I met the guy who I would say is my best friend ever since third grade. He got off the bus. He was new in the neighborhood and we were leaving school. He got off the bus. He catches up to me. And the first question I asked him was, do you like Star Wars? And he said, yes. And we were friends for life. So I was dyed in the wool from a child. And then like everybody, I think I kind of went on a little bit of a lull. I read a lot of the EU books, the Legends books, and just kind of kept up with it, but it was more of a sort of keeper of the flame sort of perspective than an active fan. And then the internet hit in the 90s, and I was working at a company and I actually was building their website. And at the same time, I was also doing some freelance writing. And I thought, well, this internet thing kind of seems like it might be a good way to combine my writing career and something I love, which is Star Wars. And so I created this website on AOL on their members platform. Nice. And I don't know if it was the first, but it was certainly one of the first websites out there. In fact, the only way I can look back at it is I have a binder I printed all the pages on the dot matrix printer at one point. Nice. So I still have it somewhere. But yeah, so building it there and really becoming a kind of one of the first voices in the Star Wars fandom, or a place where people could come and discuss it. And then as a result, Steve Sansweet at the time was going around from Star Trek convention to Star Trek convention. Yes, it was Star Trek, doing a slideshow. I think he literally had like a slide carousel with pictures from the upcoming special editions, and people wanted to know where he was. And since there was no StarWars.com, they reached out to who they knew stuff, which was me, and I didn't have his agenda. So I called Lucasfilm. And instead of just saying, yes, we'll email you a list, they put me straight through to Steve. And Steve and I was shocked because I'm looking literally at the time at all his books on my shelf while I'm talking to him. Yeah. He was asking me about the site, and I was talking about, my writing. And he said, you know what, I have so much going on at Star Wars Galaxy Magazine. Would you be interested in taking an assignment or two? And so I overnighted some of my writing to him. And next thing you know, I was signing NDAs with Topps, who was the publisher at the time, and Lucasfilm. And, for about a year and a half, I did work there. Also did some work with Scott Chernoff at Insider. And then kind of just like a lot of us, again, went away for a while, didn't leave it, but kind of went silent. And then when Disney announced the merger, my Star Wars fire caught again. And in 2019, I decided, well, I used to talk to fans all the time for Star Wars Galaxy. Why don't I do that for a podcast? Seems like I could do it. I got all the stuff at home. I can do it. And so, yeah, I've been doing the podcast, and that's actually been much more exciting as far as, because I do it so often, and I'm talking to so many different people. It's not as exciting as seeing my name in print for the first time, but the people and the connections, and as you know from Fantha Tracks, just getting to know people at Lucasfilm who just you can have a conversation with, and some opportunities that it's presented have been fantastic. So that's my journey in a nutshell.
And just on the topic of Around the Galaxy, do you think because you're back there talking to people now that it's given you not a new appreciation, but maybe more refined appreciation for where the fandom sits now, good and bad, but specific, but hopefully more good than bad, because because you are sort of dealing with you chat to folks like myself or whoever it might be that have all got slightly different angles on this thing.
Yeah, and I think I think I have a different understanding in that it's actually remarkable how much it's a similar story. And that's one of the things that inspired me to continue to write this book and dedicate it to my father and my son, because they joined me for Star Wars Celebration in Anaheim a couple of years ago, and that if I've gotten nothing from the podcast, it's that it's Star Wars is family. Whether it's the memories are all, I saw it with my dad when I was a kid. Oh, my mom took me one weekend or whatever. And that's kind of the same story. But the other piece is the community that gets built by just simply, you go out to a restaurant and you see a person with a Millennium Falcon t-shirt and you say hello and you've clicked. And I think the final piece to it too is, as you have, I've had opportunities to talk to people in the movies. I've had the opportunity to talk to people who have fan sites or authors or anybody. But once you kind of peel off that top layer, you're just talking Star Wars with somebody. To me, one of my favorite interviews that I've had the opportunity to do was with Charlie Benante, the drummer from Anthrax, right? And I've been an Anthrax fan since high school, and I'm going to see him again next summer with Iron Maiden here in the States. By the way, you should come over for that show, and we'll go together.
Okay, let's talk about that. Yeah.
Okay. But I found out he was a member of an honorary member of the 501st. And so I reached out to him. And once I got past the first couple of minutes of realizing I'm talking to one of my favorite drummers and a musical idol and icon, we were just talking about Star Wars. And he was just like riffing on, he remembers the first time he saw Star Wars. He was playing with fireworks the day before and he had a patch on his eye because something blew up in his face. But he's just telling this story that we just, it's like you and I, if we were to sit down over a beer, we'd be like, so tell me about the first time you saw Star Wars. And that's what I love. I love that it immediately breaks down barriers among people and it gives us a common ground. And again, I hate to make this connection, but it's like religion, right? Yeah. You go to the same church, you are starting with you're both starting from the same sort of starting point, and you can grow from there. Isn't
it strange though, that in that sense, it is the great leveler? Star Wars, in the UK, there's a band here called Ash who are a pretty big deal, and we're friends with the bass player specifically. And once you get past the fact that I've been listening to his albums since the 90s and they've had #1 albums, and get past all, which he does not want to talk about. He just wants to talk about what's coming out from Kenner. He just wants to know what the next toy is, or Hasbro, or whatever. He just wants to know what the next thing is. So I think, once you've got past that initial, wow, this guy's kind of a big deal.
Yeah,
we're all just fans together. That's the beautiful thing about Star Wars, though, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, and that's kind of one of the things that I remember from when I went to the premiere of Phantom Menace in New York City. I mean, I was literally in a theater full of celebrities. Almost like, remember those magic eye posters where if you stare at it long enough, you see a picture? I was like, look, I walked in and I knew there were celebrities, but then all of a sudden I realized like Macaulay Culkin is sitting in front of me. Natalie Portman's half a row over. Donald Trump is down there. Glenn Close was in there. So, but when the movie started, everybody was just a Star Wars fan. Like they cheered and they were kids again. Then, when it ended, that's a whole other story. But that's, but it was interesting because we all captured that. It didn't matter, if you were a celebrity or not, you were a Star Wars fan at that moment. And that to your point, it levels it out completely. And in fact, I had a couple conversations with some of the celebrities and we were just talking about Star Wars. And as much as I wanted to fanboy out, I didn't feel like I really wanted to, because I was talking to, John Leguizamo, and we were just sort of BSing about Star Wars. And that was kind of cool.
Where do you think now Star Wars needs to set itself, in the sense that we're rushing up on the 50th in 18 months time? And so obviously, LA is happening. So we've got that looking ahead of us. And next year we've got Mando and Grogu. And then we've got Starfighter, which is still filming here. And, that'll be out in the May just after the 50th. Mm-hmm. Where do you think we, as a fandom, I'm not saying Disney and Lucasfilm because they have no real control over that, they just have to ride the wave, but as a fandom, do you think there's a way forward where we can bring more people in a positive way? I'm saying we, what you do with Around the Galaxy, what we do with Fantha Tracks. We're tracking news, but we try and keep it positive, and I know you do the same. And so, do you think there's a way to make that work? I think it feels like a broader topic maybe than what's specifically in the book, but that sense of community absolutely hums in that book. And so it's such a key element, as we've just identified, of Star Wars. Do you think there's a way to make that happen? Because of, as you say, there's all that negativity, there's all that monetization. I know you don't like it, I don't like it. So, do you think there's a way to make it work?
It's a really good question. And I would say that the way to get there is to continue to make sure that the next audience comes in, right? And because, it doesn't matter what your fandom is. There's that older generation that's always going to have an opinion. But as long as so my son, who's 13, he's excited about it. Hopefully his children will get excited about it. So, and that's why, I feel like Mandalorian and Grogu is the safest move Disney could make. Because people who don't know a darn thing about Star Wars know who Grogu is. They've seen the t-shirts. They probably have one, even if they've never watched The Mandalorian. So that's what we need. And as much as I would have loved the Ben Solo movie, for example, and I think there's still a place for it. Yeah. I think I understand why Bob Iger might have said it would be a tough film to sell. I don't know that there's enough of that audience. And I always think about Laura Santeca saying at the beginning of Force Awakens, this will begin to set things right. Yeah. And I think that was honestly a meta comment about the prequels, right? If you were not a prequel fan, we got you. And of course, it worked for some and not for others. But I do think what needs to happen is we need to, or Star Wars needs to continue to appeal to a new audience. And sort of to hell with the ugly big voices. And I imagine some of those people are going to have kids, and their kids are going to find Star Wars. And, even if they only show them the original trilogy, that's fine. It will keep it alive. And that's what will keep this going another 50 years or so.
Hello, I'm Dennis Lawson, and you're listening to Fantha Tracks.
Going forward, because we've got this wonderful sandbox, this wonderful galaxy with all these characters and so many places to explore and more places to explore. We get new stuff in comics all the time. There's new characters coming in every week, if not more than that. Does Star Wars still need new Star Wars going forward? Does it still need the myth in the way that the original Star Wars needed the myth? Can we become more soap opera-ish by telling stories, interpersonal stories with characters, by narrowing in a little bit, not telling the bigger Star Wars stories and chasing the next Empire Strikes Back? Or does Star Wars, and I think I know the answer to this, does Star Wars need that core element of mythology, of myth, of something special, something bigger and more embracing to make it work?
So I think what we're doing now is we're playing use the word sandbox, which I think is a great way to use it. I think what happened is George thankfully created a universe that's so big that you can write these stories that are either very big or very small. I think we need the core of the myth for it to remain Star Wars. We need lightsabers. We need the Force. We need good versus evil. And I think there will be more success if the stories follow the mythical circle, is the hero's journey as it was, outlined by Joseph Campbell. So if something like Starfighter follows kind of that sort of path, whether directly or indirectly, but follows a story that we innately know, I think that's where it is. I think the Skywalker saga is sort of the heart of Star Wars, but I don't think we need another story about Luke Skywalker or Leia Organa or Han Solo. As much as we love them as characters, I think the universe has been created in such a way that we can. I think that was one of the things that I loved about Mandalorian. And I think that the OG fans, if you will, loved about Mandalorian was he was literally playing in that sandbox that we played in when we were kids. Yeah. And when he turned a corner, we were seeing a new part of the universe that we loved. We knew where it was. We knew what happened. We were comfortable in it, but we didn't know what's coming next. And that's what will keep Star Wars alive. And I think that that's where Star Wars can grow. And I think it's okay to not have an episode 10, 11, and 12. I think we can end where we are there and just keep that as the history of the galaxy, if you will. That's
brilliant. Where can people find the book?
Well, in UK and globally, you can get it on Amazon.com. The hardcover is available there, Kindle's available there, and paperback will be coming out this Thursday. So on Amazon, so you'll be able to get them all there. If you're in the States, we do have packages available on whoownsthemyth.com for signed copies and swag packs and all that sort of stuff. But or you can just go to Who Owns the Myth and just follow your link to Amazon, and you'll get to where you go. So whoownsthemyth.com is probably the best bet.
That's brilliant. Well, I'll be bringing my copy with me to LA because I'm hoping to catch up with you there.
Oh, we definitely will. We definitely will. But thank you so much for having me. I'm always a fan of yours and a fan of the stuff you do, and I'm so thankful that Star Wars has brought us together.
Absolutely, really enjoyed that. Thanks, Pete.
Thank you for joining us for this special edition of Canon Fodder. For more Star Wars podcast content, be sure to subscribe to Fantha Tracks Radio on your podcatcher of choice. Subscribe to all our social media at links.fanthatracks.com. Be sure to be checking out fanthatracks.com daily for all your latest Star Wars news. And you can also join us live on YouTube for Good Morning Tatooine every Sunday evening at youtube.com/Fanthatracks TV.
Coming up next on Fantha Tracks Radio, it's Making Tracks.
Well, I'm English, it's tea, it's got to be done.